Hello and welcome to this pattern recognition video series. So this is a new series that I'm starting. Now, I already started a beginner level pattern recognition series, and that's going to be ongoing as well. So depending on your level, you can go back and look at the beginner series. But if you're a more advanced player, well, I should say an intermediate player, this is for intermediates, rated about 1200, and up. I haven't decided how high I want to go, but I want to do a advanced and maybe a higher expert level once I get to more difficult puzzles. So those of you not familiar with pattern recognition, basically you do a set of puzzles, you solve them. It could be 5 or 10 or 20 or 100 or more. You go over them nice and slow the first time, and then instead of forgetting the puzzles and the patterns that you learn by not going over them again, you repeat the same set of puzzles multiple times. And each time you try and solve them faster. And if you do that about 7 times, those patterns from the puzzle, you'll start remembering them a lot more quickly, and the patterns kind of get burnt into your long-term memory. So when you're playing in chess games, you'll be able to recognize and use more of these patterns. All right, I'm going to try and do at least 10 puzzles here, and pause at any time if you need to think longer. If not, what should we do first? Well, we could do a quick material count to see if we're ahead or behind. We have 4 pawns. Our opponent has 5, so we're down by a pawn. We have 2 minor pieces. They have 2 minor pieces. We have a queen, but they have an extra rook as well. So they have this dangerous passed pawn and a rook that's pinning our knight to the king. So it would be a back rank mate threat here if the knight wasn't there. So, with our turn, what should we do? Well, constantly in puzzle solving and chess games, you always want to look for checks, captures, and threats in that order. Checks first because they're most forcing. So that's the first thing we want to look at, are any possible checks. Now, our bishop could go here, but it looks like the queen could just capture that bishop. And then what? We capture, king captures, and then our knight is in trouble. It would be captured, and there's a back rank mate threat. So, doesn't look like that works. What other checks do we have? The only thing is the queen. So if the queen goes here, attacking the king, whenever a king is under attack, it has 3 options or less. Capture the attacker, block the attacker, or run. And if that can't be done, then it is a checkmate. So if we deliver a check, if the king runs here, we move up, checkmating the king immediately, and that's a great pattern. If the king was here and our queen was here, we would attack through the diagonal. We would attack along this line. Normally we could attack along this line, but the pawn would be blocking us, but fortunately we would have the other pawn there. The only thing the queen would not cover are these 2 squares here, but the opponent has pieces on them, so the king would be trapped. So the king cannot go here. Now, what are the other options? As I said, the king would have to capture, and we can't be captured by anything here. Block. The bishop could block, but then we just capture it and renew our attack on the king. So probably once we go here, the king would run to here. We could march up here, attacking the king. The bishop would assist, and the other pieces would block the king. So it looks like that would work. So check, they block, and then they do go in the corner. So we can see this great pattern here where the queen, whenever you have the queen on one of the four corner squares around the king, any of those four, then you have to look out for this pattern where the queen covers the squares on the side. Now here, with this pawn in the way, fortunately we have this pawn, which helps the queen. And also, of course, the queen has to be protected, so the pawn is also protecting the queen. But great pattern there, covering all of this. All right, let's move on to problem number 2. What happened here? A rook just pinned our rook to the king. So what do? We're behind 3 pawns versus 1 over here on the queen side. So that looks, pretty bad for the white side. All right. So we counted up material. We're down by 2 pawns. We need to do something immediately. Our king is kind of out in the open here. We look at checks, captures, and threats. So what would be best? Now, if we could move that rook, it would be an immediate checkmate, but unfortunately, this rook is preventing that. Pinning our rook to our king. So what's the other option? We can't check our opponent's king, so we have to look at any captures. There aren't any unprotected pieces as far as the rook and this rook. There's unprotected pawns, but we're in trouble here. Well, not really. Yeah, I guess we could be in trouble because if there's a check here, they'll start picking off the rooks, and the king will be protecting. So what's the other option? Look at all the captures. Now, what about this? So pause the video if you need more time to think. If not, here's the answer. We're going to capture the rook. The only move possible now is for the king to recapture because he's in check. And then we can deliver a check. The opponent will have to block, and we capture, mating our opponent with the help of the king, which covers all of these squares. So let's take a look at that. Capture, and the king was forced to capture there. Check and mate. So a great pattern, kind of a side rank mate, or file, I guess, side file mate. King and rook working together. All right, on to problem number 3. Okay, in this third problem, if we count up material, we have 5 pawns. Our opponent has 6. Bishop. So bishops, rook, and queen. The material pieces are even, but we're down by a pawn. So what can we do here? Well, we want to look at checks first. The only check I see is here, which we would just be captured, or here. So that looks like that has some possibilities. Also, we could go here, but then our queen would be captured. Our rook could capture, but then the king would escape. So maybe we need to check here. And if the king tries to come out, then we check, driving the king back. And then we can capture. King would go here, and then we could deliver a mate here. Okay, so I know that was a lot of arrows. Pause the video if you need more time to think. If not, here we go. But before we do that, I could take a quick look and make sure there's not anything better. I don't see anything. That looks to be the way to go. So check. And now our opponent just made it easier for us because by going back in the corner, now we can just sacrifice the queen immediately. The rook will capture, and then our rook will deliver a back rank mate. So another great back rank mate pattern there. All right, problem number 4. The king was in check by our rook and steps forward. If we count up the material, we have 4 pawns. Our opponent has 5, but they are about to try and promote. Maybe push this rook forward to block our rook, and then push the pawn. So, with white to move, we need to do something here. We have 2 rooks, 2 pawns and a king, all hovering around our opponent's king. He doesn't have many defenders. He has some pawns around. So, if we look at checks first, maybe we go here, because if the rook checks, it'll just be captured. So I don't think that works. So pawn check. If the opponent captures that pawn, then we capture, delivering check again. And the king is very limited on where it can go. It would have to step forward, and then we would be able to mate with the other rook. So check, pawn captures, king is forced to move forward, and then our other rook will be able to deliver a mate. Oh, there we go, and rook delivers mate. And so this is a great pattern too, showing how the rooks can work together. This rook prevents the king from moving moving to the left. The other rook is covering these squares. And then our king is cutting off the other squares. And this pawn is helping as well. All right, problem number 5. The rook has just grabbed the open file. Now what do we do? Counting up material, we have 4 pawns. Our opponent has 5. We both have the bishop pair and a rook. So we're down by a pawn. We need to do something here. Let's see, with black to move, if we look at checks first. Oh, we have a rook check possible. This bishop check doesn't look good, as the king could just capture. So maybe the rook check is better. If we check, what are the options for the king? Capture, block, or run. Capturing is not possible if we go here with the rook. Blocking, if they block with their rook, we can just take. So running is probably the option that they will use. But where? The bishops are covering this area. The rook would be covering everything through the middle. So the only option is for the king to run here. And then we can continue the attack with our bishop. So let's take a quick look at this. Rook comes over. The king will run to here. And then our bishop can check here or here. But which one is better? Well, if we check the king, either way, the king is running over to the c file. If we go up to f1 with our bishop, prevents the king from going here and attacking our pawn. So the king would have to move here. And how do we continue our attack? So maybe this attack doesn't do too much. Once again, we check. The king starts running. All right. Check. King runs here. If we go here, the king would have to run up to here. Then what do we do? Our attack runs out of steam. All right, this one is a little bit trickier. I'm not sure what they want in this one. So, I haven't decided if I'll do 5 or 10 problems in these intermediate puzzles because sometimes they take longer. And I don't want the video dragging on too long. Some viewers requested that I keep the videos under 30 minutes. But all this talking is probably not helping either. So, what can we do? I don't know. I'm still thinking we should attack, but the king would be able to run. So the king has to run there. Huh. All right, check. That's the most obvious move. They run here. Then we either have to put the bishop here, protected by our rook, or up here. Depends which way we want them to go. If they go down here, they'll attack this pawn, which the bishop is already attacking. If we make the king run up here, then what? Maybe we need to attack an unprotected piece instead. What if we go after their bishop? That bishop could just go here. It doesn't want to go here, or it would block the king's escape. Could go here. It would cause problems. Here it would cause problems. If it goes here, we can capture. I think that's what we do. But the problem we have to look out for is if we go here, our opponent has time to check us. And then if we run up here, it gives the opponent, their bishop will still be under attack. So I don't know, I'm gonna try that. Nope, they don't want that. So apparently they probably want this check. Oh, okay, I looked at it wrong. Now we can just go here and then grab the bishop. All right, so there we go. All right. That was a good example of looking at what happens when pieces are lined up on the same diagonal. So we knew that by going here, the king is forced to go here, and then they would be lined up on the same diagonal here. And the bishop can attack. All right. I guess I'll try 5 more problems. Hopefully the video won't go on too long. So, I guess I have to go back through this one again. All right, there we go. Then we grab that. Okay, I'll try and do 5 more problems. Let me speed this up a little. Okay, what do we have? The king, did it just capture something? Moved over to here. Oh, okay. If we look at checks first, I mean, we could count up material. We have 5 pawns. Our opponent has 6, so we're down by a pawn, and they have a pawn majority over here. So we need to do something about that as quick as possible. If we look at checks, we could go here or here, delivering a check, and that can be very dangerous, especially if we go here, creating a battery with our rook and checking the king at the same time. If the king goes here or here, well then we can pin the queen to the king. So check and then the pin, forcing the exchange here. Now we're just up material, queen for rook. All right, problem number 7. What do we have here? Okay. Count up the material. We have 6 pawns. Our opponent has, what, 5? But they have an extra bishop. How do we turn the tide here? How do we turn the tide? Well, the first thing I noticed, I mean, we want to look at checks, captures, and threats in that order. I noticed that, you could try and do this, forking both pieces here with the pawn, which is backed up by the queen. But if we're looking at checks first, do we even have any checks? I don't even see any possible checks. So captures, you want to look at unprotected pieces like this bishop. We can't capture it outright. We could threaten. So do we have any threats? We have that pawn threat to target both of these pieces. We could move the rook here, try and attack. But we have to watch out if we move our rook for any back rank. I mean, we could also move up. Well, we can't even move here or the queen will get us. So if we move that rook off the back rank, we could have a check and then a queen trade. All right. If we try and move our queen out here and attack, well, the bishop could just move back. Also dangerous might be this move, threatening an attack on the king. So I'm still thinking about this move. The only thing is, if I push that pawn, the bishop could capture with check here. And then what? I would have to... So if I push forward, they capture with check. I would have to probably move my king. Does that work? Pawn fork. Check. King moves. Now what? They could have time to move their queen out of the way. Or they could just move here. I don't know. I think I'm going to try it. Okay, that's what they wanted. Okay, so now there's a threat here. But the problem is we can capture the rook with a check. Discovered check by the queen. So it looks like that's winning because they're in check. That'll give us time to deal with our rook. And how do we do that? We could go there and just protect. Anyway, let me move on so I can finish the 10 puzzles here. We have, 3 more? So problem number 8, a knight has just moved forward attacking our bishop along with the queen. But we may have a little tactic here. If we notice their queen's unprotected. Okay, but first let's count up the material. We have 6 pawns. Our opponent has 6 as well. 3 minor pieces versus 3. 2 rooks and a queen. It's our move. If we look at checks first, the only check I see is a knight check. And that could be the one we want because we could move that knight up there, attacking the queen. We're forking the king and the queen. So they would probably capture our knight. If they don't, we just grab their queen. But then it gives us time to move this bishop up here, checking the king and grabbing the queen. So check, check, and we grab the queen. We're also threatening this bishop. All right, on to problem number 9. Okay, material. We have 6 pawns. Our opponent has 6 pawns also, and we each have a bishop and a queen. Queens are lined up on each other. Their queen is protected and ours is not. We could just drop our bishop back, or we could move our queen out of the way. All right. What should we do here? Oh, we have to look for checks first, as always. Do we have any checks? So take a look at this position, see if there are any checks. Pause the video if you need more time. If not, the only check I see, it's a little hard to see, but it's over here. Moving to the side and delivering a check from the edge of the board. And that looks really dangerous because our bishop is preventing the king from running, as is his pawn and bishop. So remember, when a king is being checked, the 3 options are to capture, block, or run. And if that can't be done, it is mate. So once we check, the queen could block, but then we'll just capture. Check, block, and mate. All right, the final problem, number 10. Here we go. Problem number 10. King has just moved forward, possibly because this threat is building here. But if we count up material, we have 5 pawns. Our opponent has 5. But they have a queen versus our bishop and rook. So that's pretty dangerous with a queen on the board against the against the rook and the bishop, especially if they're not coordinating well together. We have 2 unprotected pieces. So one immediate threat is for the queen to jump here, forking. So that would have been a better move. Oh, excuse me. I take that back. That would have been a terrible move because the bishop is covering that square. So that would have been a bad check because the bishop would have just captured the queen. Are there any other moves? All right, it's our turn. So instead of looking at their possibilities, let's see what we have available. Checks first, we have that check. The king would be forced to do what? Go here. Okay, so now we're talking. Once the king gets into an area where he doesn't have many move options, that can be very dangerous for the opponent. Or your king too. All right. We capture here. And this is a great little pattern. When the rook lands here on the side square. So, all right, the difference between a corner or side square around the king. You have these corner squares around the king. Okay, then you have the 4 squares on the sides around the king. So if we go here, capturing the pawn on the side square, the rook will cover all, as long as the rook is protected by this bishop. The rook makes a T. It covers these 3 squares and these 2, making a T. The squares that are not covered will be these, but this one and this one are blocked by the pawns. The bishop is covering that one. So along with, after this move, all these squares will be covered. The only option will be for the king to run here. And we just have to make sure that we have a good follow-up attack. So how can we continue after rook captures, king runs, maybe this pawn checks? If the king moves forward, then our bishop can deliver a mate. So more likely, pawn will capture, our pawn will capture, and it'll be protected by the rook. So the king will have to move forward, and then our bishop can deliver the mate. So, pause the video and look at all that on your own. Try and calculate as much as you can in your head. Here we go. And the bishop delivers that mate. So I mentioned it takes at least, I don't know if I mentioned it in this video, but in the past I've mentioned it takes about 3 pieces on average to checkmate a king. And so here we have the bishop, the rook and pawn, all covering squares around the king. And then our own king is assisting. So, 3 is just an average. It could take more or less. Okay, was that the final problem? I believe it was. So we already did 10 problems. Okay, well, I will end it there. Feel free to leave comments, good or bad, whatever's on your mind. I enjoy hearing from viewers and subscribers. Let me know what you think about chess or any subject. All right. Well, like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.